Alright, GW. Teach me how to paint some Necrons.
Elite Necron troops often have green-bladed cloaks.
Hey, it's Duncan, back when he did the videos.
I've got a nice point to it, we're ready to begin painting.
Hey, there's Peachy. He left to start his own channel too.
Before you do any of this painting.
Oh, who's this? A new guy. Well, I'm sure his future YouTube channel will be great. I've never painted a Necron before, but I'm a big fan of the official box art paint scheme, so when GW sent me their recent Necron heroes, I thought it was a good excuse to watch the GW painting videos, follow their advice, and inevitably show you yours are never gonna look like this. Just kidding, I'd never drag GW through the mud like that. Now you could make the claim that the way Games Workshop teaches miniature painting isn't supposed to be like the box art. It's supposed to be easily approachable for new painters and easy to follow steps. But if that's the case, then why do they have such a large amount of videos labeled as Parade Ready, where they focus on upgrading the paint jobs for an Armies on Parade painting competition? And why don't those videos show us how to paint like the box art? And if their painting is supposed to be approachable, why are the only painting videos they put behind the Warhammer Plus paywall the Masterclass series? Surely if they charge for these, it means that they're the most valuable painting videos they make to us in the painting community, right? So let's follow the steps on how GW teaches us to paint minis and show where they're steering us wrong. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be complicated to paint like the box art. GW says we start by priming our Zarakhan Dynasty Necron with Runelord Brass, but these guys are largely silver. The only reason I can think of why is that they're pushing their rattle can primers and they just don't have a bright silver option or something. Instead, I go with a 50-50 mix of Stormhold Silver plus Runelord Brass as my base coat to keep that little bit of color depth that the brass gives us, but still keeping that silver look. The base coats of all the metals on the box art is definitely not pure brass, so why tell people to prime their silver models that way? Now in every Games Workshop video, they have you base coat each different section of the model before you move on to the next step. And I guess this kind of makes sense from a simplicity standpoint because you're doing all of step 1 before you move on to do all of step 2 and so on. So that's what I did, but honestly it's making a lot more work for yourself if you do it this way. You're much better off just painting the parts of the model that are hardest to reach first because you're gonna make some mistakes and have to tidy up those mistakes later anyway. Why should we have to tidy up after step 1 and then again after step 2 and then again after step 3? Is this a major mistake in educating new painters? No, but you do end up either getting frustrated by how often you need to clean up your mistakes, or you just say screw it and you don't fix the mistakes that you didn't even need to make in the first place if you just painted each different section to completion. When I got to base coating the brass metallics, I'm happy that I made the swap on the silvers that I did. They want us to use Retributor Gold on all of these parts, which isn't even at all close to the color that the box art uses. The only real gold in this video are those of you that subscribe to the channel, because 50% of you aren't subscribed, and you'd make it the best Christmas season ever for me if you just hit that subscribe button. This Runelord Brass is definitely the color that they use in the box art, and it's a paint they produce anyway, just like the silver, so why not just have us do it? These are just a couple of the many head-scratching examples I found of them telling us how to paint the Zarakhan Dynasty, and then using different paints than their official box art paint scheme. This isn't about simplifying anything for your new painters. This is just frustrating them when the model they paint doesn't even look like the same colors as the one on the box. Now I will say that there are some positive aspects to painting all of your base coats first, and that is helping you make color decisions early on in the painting process. I'll just assume this is an unintended benefit because they're just telling us what colors to paint anyway, but it is good practice to look at the colors as you develop your own paint schemes in your future armies. For example, the color I chose for the sand on the base is a bit too vibrant compared to the other colors on the model, so I chose to paint over it with a much more desaturated tan color. In some of the Necron videos, they tell you to base coat the parts that are going to be glowing later with white, and sometimes they tell you to do it with a dark Caliban green. This really depends on which approach they're going to use later on in the video, and I'm going to go with white. But what I won't do is use their garbage-ass Corax white paint, and neither should you. With base coats done, we're on to step 2, which is shades and shadows, aka just slap a wash over everything. And honestly, especially for metallics, This isn't bad advice. But you're not going to want to use their new garbage shade paints because they're super glossy and they don't tint the entire surface like their good old recipe did. By using washes on metallics, we're both cutting back the shine while building up depth and darkness in the shadows, which is important to achieve the reflective look. We'll bring back the shine later with highlights, but if everything is super shiny, then nothing is shiny. Savvy? Now, washes can be a bit tricky to control, and you're not a bad painter if it runs where you don't want it to. But guess what? If you base coat the whole model before this step, you're going to have to go through and reapply base coats after this step for every mistake that you made. It is wonderful. Now, in their videos, they say to wash the bronzes with Agrax Earthshade, which isn't at all what's used on the box art. They appear to have a mix of washes that gives a much more warm, interesting shade to the bronze, not just a dull brown. Now, after testing a number of different mixes, I'm pretty sure that they're using a 50-50 mix of a purple wash and a flesh wash. Again, why not just tell people to mix one brush full of this and one brush full of that and paint it on? None of us are so dense that we can't grasp the concept of mixing 50% this and 50% this. Plus, they get to sell 2 pots of wash. Now here's where things get just slightly more complicated because none of the box art paint jobs just use a wash over everything. They add a bit more depth into the shadows. And this is a big difference between what they teach and what they show. What we do is thin down some dark paint or ink. I use black for the silver armor and dark brown for the bronze armor. And we just glaze it towards the areas that would fall into shadow and don't paint any of the areas that we want to keep the brightest. This is called glazing, and it's a term that you'll almost never hear Games Workshop use in their painting videos. But guess what? They use it in a lot of their videos anyway. They just don't call it that. Every time they ask you to mix in Lamy and medium to create very thin layers and push those towards one direction of the model or another, that's glazing. Heck, they even use that same technique on the glowing weapons in these very Necron videos. Each glaze only makes a slight change to the shadow you're creating, and the key is to let each one dry and go over that area as many times as you need to achieve the intensity of shadows that you're looking for. Now, you may say that they don't teach glazing because glazing takes a lot of time, and to that, I tend to disagree. Painting the base coats of this mini took me the longest to complete, about 40% of my total painting time. Glazing, on the other hand, took me way less than an hour, and that was with 5 to 6 coats of glazes in some areas. And the heavy metal paint team uses glazing on every single one of their box arts. It's such a great skill to learn, so why not teach it so we can practice it? Today's video is brought to us by the #1 place that us creative types go to get our learn on, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators. Explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and go down the rabbit hole of artistic enlightenment. There's tons of applicable classes for our mini hobby. Artsy related things regarding color, light, and even artist productivity. One I'm excited to start is called Productivity for Creatives, building a system that brings out your best with Thomas Frank. Lord knows I struggle to make the most out of my hobby time. Skillshare is great because it's curated specifically for learning, meaning there's no ads, they're always launching new high quality classes by people that know their stuff, and the classes are broken up into bite-sized chunks so you can learn whenever you have some free time, over lunch, on the toilet, on a hot air balloon ride, wherever. If you want to figure out if it's something that you would like or not, why don't you click on the link in the video description below and get a 1-month free trial. That way you can take her for a spin. But it's only available for the first 500 subscribers, so check the link and enjoy your free trial. Big thank you to Skillshare for supporting the channel. Now let's get these minis put away and get back to the video. On to step 3, which is highlights. And while this step isn't covered in the most basic videos in both their classic and speed paint video range, it is covered in all of their really old videos as well as all of their parade ready ones. And highlighting metallics is really a very satisfying thing, at least for me in miniature painting. You get to bring back that shine just where you want it with that bright silver paint. On important areas that would catch a lot of light, like his forehead, I'm covering all of the upward facing surface, not just the edges, because I really want those to shine again. And edge highlighting is not something that should demand hours and hours from you if you don't want it to. You can just hit the most important edges that are easiest to reach with your brush, and it will look worlds better while still not costing you hours of time. And a good thing about doing even a little bit of edge highlighting on every model you paint is you're improving those fine motor skills, so over time you'll improve and you'll get faster at it. When people have frustrations with edge highlighting, it almost always comes from paint consistency. You want to add enough water to the paint so it flows easily off of your brush when you're trying to run that fine line, but not so thin that it doesn't even look like you've painted anything. Now, each paint color requires a slightly different amount of water to add to hit that ideal position, but as long as you're paying attention to this step and going for that right consistency, you'll get the hang of it. When it comes to painting the big green flowy cape on this guy, the box art has a lot more layers of brightness going on, and the easiest way to approach this is with some careful dry brushing. By using that Caliban green base coat as our darkest green, I can slowly build up the brightness on the areas that would catch more light by dry brushing in slow circles with brighter and brighter greens. And I'm not worried about being too exact with this step because each pass of the dry brush will only brighten up those areas little by little. But this is an example of why painting all the base coats first, like Games Workshop wants us to, doesn't always work out great. If I had my own way, I would have painted this whole cloak start to finish before painting anything else in the model, because while I'm getting a little bit vigorous with my circles of dry brushing, I did get green on other areas. And as I was building up the colors on this cloak, I was pretty impressed with how it was turning out. So yeah, if you are painting bigger areas and you want to build up highlights, dry brushing works pretty great and it's fast. But the brightest plates of the cloak weren't quite as bright as I'd like them to be. On the box art, they get quite bright on the areas that would really directly hit the light from above, as if these plates themselves are reflective. And I'm realizing now that I never did a shade over the cloak back in step 2. Whoops. But that's fine. I wasn't planning on doing an all-over wash anyway. I'm just going to create another glaze of a nice deep rich purple and put that into the most downward facing sections of the cloak to give us a nice rich deep color in the shadows. The last thing I noticed in my cloak versus that of the box art is that theirs has a little bit more warmth in the brightest areas of the green. So I just thinned down some Cassandoran yellow shade paint with some water and put a thin layer over the brighter green areas to match that warm green in the box art. Our last and likely most complex step is painting all the glowing blades and orbs on our Zarokhan Dynasty Necron. In the videos, they use Tesseract Glow, which is a technical paint that's kind of a glowy green, but no stores within 100 miles of where I sit had that paint in stock. Luckily, the secret ingredient to create that vibrant glow is just fluorescent yellow paint. I mix in about 3 parts fluorescent yellow with 1 part striking scorpion green contrast paint, and we have that vibrant glow in the raised areas with a more saturated neon green in the recesses. Now, to build up some depth and give that proper glowy look, we can glaze in some warpstone glow and then an even darker Caliban green into the shadows. And this step can be tricky, knowing where to place these shadows. The easy solution to this is just follow the box art, see where they painted their shadows, and just paint yours in the same spot. And note that this can be a little tricky at first because contrast paint has a nice amount of gloss to it, meaning regular acrylic paint over the top doesn't want to stick very well. One trick you can do is after applying your base coats of this glowing green, come back in and apply a coat of matte varnish just with your brush. This will make a surface that's much easier for following layers to adhere to. And our final step is to again edge highlight, this time mixing our fluo yellow with pure white acrylic paint. This is especially important on these glowy bits because they really define the bright edges. And with the dark sections meet the bright ones, it'll really pop and look glowing. So we started by following their rules, deviated when necessary to try to achieve the box art look. But there's one thing that the box arts do that I will never do. Painting these poop brown base rims, or bad black base rims, or get the hell out. Now, I'm not saying that my paint job today looks as good as that on the box art, but for just a day and a half of work, I'm pretty damn proud of it. And the frustrating part is, they have all the tools to give us all the steps to paint like this. So why give us the wrong paints and the wrong steps that aren't even difficult? In all seriousness, I enjoy trying to figure out what I think was done to paint like these box arts, and I think the Heavy Metal team keeps upping their game in these awesome paint jobs. They inspire me to try and improve my painting. So if you enjoy painting along with me or just like seeing my failures in videos like this and you want to support me in making more videos, you can use the links below to pick up your hobby supplies and models at a discount. Or you can pick up some Ninjon merch, or maybe join the crew over at the Ninjon Patreon and get some awesome rewards for doing so. A massive thank you to those of you that support me, especially over on Patreon. I couldn't keep making videos like this without you. And speaking of videos, I'm going to be back here again next week with another new one. Just make sure that sometime between now and then, you find time in your day to slay the gray.